Welcome, everyone. It's really fantastic to be able to welcome so many of you here today to what's a very significant event in the life of plant sciences in Cambridge, and we hope will be very significant around the world. And that is the opening, this virtual launch of the Crop Science Centre. It's really lovely to see so many of you join us. My name is Rob Doubleday. I'm the Executive Director of the University's Centre for Science and Policy, and I'll be hosting this afternoon's launch ceremony. So I'll just start with one or two brief housekeeping arrangements. So your microphones and cameras will be turned off throughout. There's a lot of you. So I also, when it comes to the Q&A session, I'm afraid you won't be able to pose your own questions yourself, but if you could please type them into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, I will read out some questions and we'll get some discussion going with the panel. And we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. But if we don't get to your questions, we're sorry. But this is very much the start of a conversation, which we hope you will continue with. With that, just to say that also this will be recorded, and so that you'll have a chance to share this link with others in the future. But really, that's all from me for housekeeping. And so what I'd like to do now is introduce a video clip of welcome from the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cambridge, Professor Stephen Toope.
I am Stephen Toope, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cambridge. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar as we launch the new Crop Science Centre, a partnership between the University of Cambridge and the National Institute of Agricultural Botany. The current pandemic has caused many of us to reflect on what we value in our daily lives. One thing I appreciate more and more each day is the fundamental importance of universities. No surprise there. At a time like this, what could be more fundamental to society than our research and teaching? And there is surely nothing more essential to human life than the availability of food and ensuring the sustainable future of agriculture. As the world's population expands, and as we all cope with the effects of the pandemic, it's impossible to overstate the importance of the Crop Science Centre, its global relevance and global reach. Because another thing the pandemic has brought home is just how interconnected we all are. We're dependent on each other across nations and across continents. Pre-COVID, our planet was already reeling with the effects of climate change: fires, floods, droughts, extremes in temperatures. By the end of this year, the World Food Programme expects 265 million people to be on the brink of starvation. Almost half of that number has been added this year as a result of the pandemic. And that's not to mention the further 821 million people who go to bed hungry every night, some right here in our own country. A pandemic knows no boundaries. Climate change is not limited by geography. There are no borders to the challenges we face. The work of the Crop Science Centre is important and urgent. The Centre formalizes the university's long-standing partnership with Niab, a partnership that succeeds because it addresses challenges to food security through research and translates that research into action and real change. The Crop Science Centre is built out of academic brilliance and determination, fixed in place by collaboration with industries, governments, and charities, locally, nationally, and internationally. It's where we will train the next generation of scientists, and where sustainable, high-yield farming, resilient crops, and advanced crop production technologies will be developed and tested. It's where we will make a difference in fields all over the planet.
Great. Well, there you have the introduction from the Vice-Chancellor, setting the scale of ambition for this centre. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce the three panelists who will really get this centre off the ground today. First, it's a pleasure to welcome Sir David Baulcombe, who's the Royal Society Research Professor at the University of Cambridge. As many of you will know, David's groundbreaking research on the processes that help understand how genes get turned on and off has made huge contributions fundamentally to our understanding of biology. But David's always been interested in how that fundamental science can contribute to the improvement of crops. So David, you're very welcome. And Tina Barsby, Chief Executive Officer of Niab, or formerly the National Institution of Agricultural Botany. Tina's a plant scientist as well, who's worked in academia, but also many years in industry. And her leadership of Niab has seen it really play a central role in translating plant sciences into products and services that really make a difference on the ground to farmers. So Tina, it's a great pleasure to welcome you too. And between them, David and Tina really have been instrumental in laying the groundwork, in setting the scene for the establishment of this centre. So it's great to have you both here to launch it. And then thirdly, it's a pleasure to introduce Giles Oldroyd, who's the Russell R. Geiger Professor of Crop Sciences. His research in the United States and then latterly in Norwich at the John Innes Centre has really focused on understanding the interaction between plants and beneficial microorganisms and thinking hard about, again, how fundamental science can make a difference in the field and to the wider world. And as you know, Giles is going to be the founding director of this Crop Science Centre. So with David, Tina, and now Giles, I'll hand over to you, Giles.
Thank you to Rob, and thank you to all of you for joining us today at the start of this really special journey as we launch the Crop Science Centre. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions imposed on us by the COVID-19 epidemic, we're unable to host you in our brand new facilities here in Cambridge. So instead, we've prepared a video to show you some of those facilities and to set the stage for what we're trying to achieve in the Crop Science Centre.
The Crop Science Centre is going to make a huge difference.
It amplifies our impact.
It puts us, I think, in a very, very strong global position.
The Crop Science Centre is an alliance between Niab and the University of Cambridge. And our ambition is to bring together the deep and excellent plant science in the university with the crop science and crop work that we do at Niab.
It brings hundreds of years of fundamental plant research at the university alongside 100 years of application in agriculture from Niab.
Niab is now the largest trials organisation in the UK, and every year we bring around 100,000 plots to yield.
We do applied research in the field to provide services and products directly for the industry. We work very closely with large and small companies and also with government.
I think it's great to see Cambridge University now working directly in partnership with Niab.
The Crop Science Centre has the opportunity to really drive what we call end-to-end approaches, which ensure that research investments lead to development impacts.
It provides us with the capability to move cutting-edge science from the laboratory to the farm.
Over the next 30 years, we have some pretty significant challenges. We have an expanding global population that's also changing their diets, putting very significant pressure on our food production systems. That is happening in a time of global climate change, which is going to impact very significantly how and where we can grow our food. And we want to drive greater sustainability in our food production system.
We need to produce the food that we need in the ways that are environmentally sustainable, that don't produce large amount of carbon dioxide and other emissions. So we need a lot of scientific and technical innovation in agriculture.
We've identified 3 key areas. The first is in pests and diseases, how we help the plant to use its own defences to ward off insect attacks, fungal attacks. The second area is in the area of nutrition, trying to find ways for the plant to harvest its own nitrogen, its own phosphorus from the soil, from the air, so that we don't need to use these chemical fertilisers. And the third area is photosynthesis. How does it capture the carbon that is the backbone of making its food?
I want to ensure that those technological advancements aren't just available to the wealthiest farmers on the planet. I want the legacy to be smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa growing more food, getting more money for their products and being wealthier as a result of that. And I want to see the whole global agriculture being far more sustainable than it currently is.
This centre can really make a difference.
It sends such a strong signal to the research community, to government, to industry.
It's the missing link in the puzzle of product development.
It's really focused on delivering real change that will impact food security, opportunities to mitigate climate change, and real change in people's livelihoods.
For me, the Crop Science Centre is all about fundamental agricultural transformation, improving food production, and getting that to everybody.
So I hope that you can get from that video some of the excitement that we all feel about the Crop Science Centre. And over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to give you a little bit more background about why we're launching the centre today and what we want to achieve. So agriculture appears in very different forms across the world, from the very highly mechanised, high input agriculture that predominates here in the UK and in other rich world nations, to a much more labour intensive and low input agriculture where many smallholder farmers rely. In whatever guise it appears, agriculture is a force for good. It produces the affordable and nutritious food on which we all depend, but it also provides a livelihood for billions of people around the planet. In fact, for the vast majority of the world's poorest people, productivity from agriculture is the principal source of income. For these people, the farm not only provides the food with which they can feed their families, but it also provides them with an income that can allow them to send their kids to school, for instance. For many of these smallholder farmers, particularly those in sub-Saharan Africa, they're achieving less than 20% of the potential productivity of their farms. So there's a huge opportunity here to raise their productivity where it's most needed and to provide a route out of poverty. When we look back over the last 100 years, we've seen a massive expansion in our global population. And over that period, we've also seen steady increases in agricultural outputs that in many ways have kept pace with that increasing demand for food. Looking forwards to the next 100 years, we're going to continue to see an expansion in that global population, in particular an expansion in sub-Saharan Africa. And if we're going to keep pace with that increased demand for food, then the pace of agricultural outputs needs to increase. Now is the time when we should be envisioning what our future food production should look like. What is the world that we want to live in come 2050, come 2100? If we follow a business as usual scenario, we're going to see an ever greater dependence on chemical inputs in our agricultural systems to support that increased demand for food production. In particular, inorganic fertilizers use closely tracks growth in population. And you can see from this graph that the UN is predicting very significant increases in the global use of inorganic fertilizers. Already the use of inorganic fertilizers causes very detrimental impacts on the biodiversity of aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. And in a business as usual scenario, those impacts are going to increase quite significantly. We're not just releasing a lot of agricultural nutrients into the environment, we're also losing a lot of carbon from the system. Most agricultural soils are emitting carbon. This doesn't have to be the case. Soils can sequester carbon and can contribute to the reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions. So we really sit at a crossroads right now. Do we want the scenario that's presented at the top of this graph, of this slide, where growth in agricultural outputs have not kept pace with the increased demand from the global population, but the environmental footprint has continued to expand? Or do we want the scenario on the bottom of this slide, whereby the growth in agricultural outputs has kept up with the demand from the global population, but we've also managed to reduce those environmental impacts. Clearly, it's the latter scenario that we want to achieve, but we have to recognize in the years that we're striving to achieve that scenario, we also have to cope with the impact of climate change. The local weather where we grow our food will be changing over the future decades. It's going to be getting warmer, we're going to see changes in precipitation, and we're going to see increases in extreme weather events. So the future that I want to live in is one where our agricultural systems are sustainably productive, they're climate ready and able to cope with the future changes in climate, and where the agricultural gains that we achieve are accessible to all of the world's farmers. And this is why we're launching the Crop Science Centre today. The Centre is all about recognizing impact. We are driven by impact and fueled by excellence. And for me, what the Centre is really about is recognizing fundamental agricultural transformation. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So at places like the University of Cambridge, we've been very good at describing how plants function. When I first started working in the laboratory almost 30 years ago as an undergraduate, I was lucky to be involved in some of the very first gene cloning from plants, where we were able to identify the very earliest genes to describe plant function. Since that work, we've seen a revolution in our understanding of how plants function, and we can draw detailed and descriptive maps of the genetic components that control how, for instance here, plants recognize microorganisms in their environment. But our understanding is very profound about how plants recognize the environment and then adapt their growth and development to optimize performance. Where I think universities have been much less successful is taking that fundamental understanding and making real-world impact in the field. In contrast, organizations like Niab work very closely with farmers to improve the production on the farm. They develop new crop varieties through breeding, and they test many varieties and many new products and advise farmers how best to improve productivity and sustainability on their farm. But in many ways, they're working quite close to the coalface. And if we want to recognize that transformation in agriculture that we so desperately need, then we need to bring these two pillars of activity together. We need to use that foundational understanding in plant sciences and apply it to these problems we face in agriculture to bring forward that agricultural transformation. And that's what we're doing at the Crop Science Centre. So already in Cambridge, we have some fantastic organizations in place. We have the Sainsbury Laboratory that's pioneering in our understanding of plant growth and development. We have the Department of Plant Sciences that for hundreds of years has been advancing our understanding of how plants function. And then we have Niab that works closely with industry and farmers to improve productivity on the farm. The Crop Science Centre is an alliance between the university and Niab. It's bringing these organizations together, and importantly, it's providing the foundations to recognize impact from all of that fundamental understanding and advances in plant sciences. Associated with the centre has been a new capital investment. We have brand new buildings that came available this year. And this encompasses the new international headquarters for Niab, as well as new facilities for University of Cambridge faculty and staff to undertake research. We are geographically aligning these organizations and intellectually aligning them so that we can create that impact in agriculture from all of that fundamental understanding. Of course, it's people that actually make the impact. And I'm excited to say we have quite a number of positions now currently available that we're recruiting for in the centre. We have research fellowships that allow early career scientists to develop more impactful programs in their research. We have postdoctoral positions and graduate studentships to work in crop sciences. But we're also putting in positions such as impact managers that help us recognize impact from our research, as well as platforms that increase the pace of activity in crop sciences so that we can recognize that impact quicker. We've identified 3 primary areas where we think we can be most impactful in agriculture. We're working to replace inorganic fertilizers with beneficial microbial associations. We believe we can increase the efficiency of photosynthesis, driving up the potential productivity of crops. And we think we can reduce the significant losses that we experience from pests and diseases that occur all around the world. And our toolbox for recognizing that impact is the phenomenal genetic diversity that exists in plants. Plants have been evolving on this planet for 450 million years. And over that time, they've been tackling many of the problems that we experience in agriculture. And through this phenomenal genetic diversity in plants are many inventive ways to solve the very problems that we experience in agriculture. And now, through the phenomenal foundational understanding that we have in plants, we can access all of this genetic diversity that's available to us. When I look back at the last 100 years in agriculture, I think we've had much too greater a reliance on chemistry to solve our problems. But when I look forward to the next 100 years, I think we're on the cusp of a biological revolution in agriculture. I believe we can replace most, if not all, of the chemical inputs we currently use with biological solutions. But we can also use that phenomenal genetic diversity in plants to improve productivity in crops and to drive adaptability to the climate changes that we face. I believe that the biological revolution in agriculture has the potential to create a much more sustainable and equitable global food production system. So I'm really excited to be launching the Crop Science Centre today. It's been 5 years in the making, and there's been many people who have been involved in this process. I don't have time to thank everybody who's been involved, but I'd like to acknowledge the huge efforts from many people within the University of Cambridge and at Niab who have worked tirelessly over the years to take us to where we are. I'd like to very much acknowledge Sir David Baulcombe for his original vision and his efforts in setting up the Crop Science Centre in the first place. We would not be here without the generous support of the estate of Russell R. Geiger and Rob and Sue Cawthorne. And the capital investment for the new builds came from UKRI. And I'd also like to acknowledge the funding agencies that support our research in the past and continue to support our research going forwards at the centre. We face quite significant challenges over the next 50 years. But I also think that we have some superb opportunities. And I hope that in launching the Crop Science Centre today, we're putting in place one piece of that puzzle that will allow us to recognise some of those opportunities in creating that fundamental agricultural transformation in the way we grow our food. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Giles, for that very, very exciting vision for what we can all expect from the Crop Science Centre. It's now really over to you who've joined us for this virtual launch. This is your chance to ask questions, to dig into some details, and David, Tina and Giles have all volunteered to respond to questions. As I said, do put them in your, put the chat button at the bottom, and it'd be helpful if you'd add your name and institution affiliation, and I'll read out those questions that we've got. Perhaps I'll start with this first question. Quite a lot of the questions are sort of digging into the detail and say, well, how is this going to work in practice? So the first one is from Tom Bradshaw from the National Farmers Union, who asks, how are you going to connect the research that you're talking about with farmers and growers on the ground? So perhaps Tina, could you start with that one?
Thanks for that question, Tom. I'm really happy to kick off and answer that. This goes right to the heart of Niab's existence. Niab was established 101 years ago, specifically to bring the products of research to farmers and growers. And we've continued with that mission over that 100 years, changing slightly what we do, but maintaining those connections with farmers, yes, but also with those who supply farmers, with those who take farmers' crops and produce bread, produce other food products, and we have strong connections across the industry. Niab provides laboratory services and field services to that industry, and therefore in a way it's kind of embedded with them, and so has some very, very strong relationships and strong connections, particularly through our member networks, which gives us a position where we can link the research directly to the people who need it. And so what we want is for those existing partnerships to come to the Crop Science Centre, to join us and help to guide our research, help to inform our research, and help us to bring those products to the market. So it really is not just about us taking it to you, it's about you coming and taking it from us.
Thank you, Tina. Well, that's a clear invitation. Yeah, another question that in a way is on a similar track is from Phil Taylor from Bayer, who asks, with the creation of this centre, what's in place now that will ensure that the impact will be better realised from academic discoveries in plant sciences? So what's different now, and what role will the centre play? David, Sir David, would you like a go at answering that one? You're muted still.
Unmuting, so thank you for the chance to address that question. I think what's different now is that we're on the cusp of what I think is going to be a golden era for crop science. So Giles alluded to all of the basic science that's been done over the recent decades that has given us a real tremendous understanding of the basic biology of plants, how they protect themselves against disease, how they grow and develop, how they respond to stress. We can now look at their genome organization and its regulation and all of these sorts of questions. So that's the basic biology that's been going on for decades, and the progress has just been amazing. Over the last 10 years or so, superimposed on the progress in science, we've got a number of technical innovations. So now we've got gene editing, we've got speed breeding, we've got genome sequencing. So, and together with that, we've got computer-based technologies, modeling, artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. So what we can now do, I think, is transfer our understanding from basic science to technology in crops that will allow productivity with reduced environmental impacts. It'll facilitate low input agriculture and so on and so forth. And I think a particularly exciting prospect as well is that we can diversify agriculture, increase the range of species that we grow. So one of the questions I noticed on the chat line referred to ecology and ecological methods. And what I'm looking forward to is a bringing together of the innovation that molecular biology can provide with our understanding of ecology and different ways of growing plants. So we can integrate this new understanding of science with companion cropping, with increased use of no-till and conservation agriculture and so on and so forth. Bring all of these different disciplines together. And to be able to do this in the background of the, let's say, multidisciplinarity of Cambridge and Cambridge University, together with the practical expertise and the connections with industry that Niab provides. I think this puts our Crop Science Centre in really a unique position to make a difference in agriculture in future. So what's different now from in the past? Well, I think what's different now is that everything is coming together.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Gosh, we've got loads of excellent questions. It's going to be a struggle to get through. But there's quite a number of questions that focus on the question about how will the centre really be delivering value for smallholders, and what is the priority that's going to be placed on farmers in the global south. So for example, Renee Lafitte from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation asks, getting new traits to smallholder farmers can be challenging. How do you envisage achieving this? There are many other questions along similar lines. Giles, do you want to have a go?
So yeah, that's a great question, and thanks for posing it, Renee. I don't underestimate the challenge of getting products to smallholder farmers. It is a pretty significant challenge. And the three things come to mind when I think about that challenge. Firstly, we have to make sure we're making the right products. And that means in part talking to farmers and ensuring that we're generating the products that they need to use. But I think an important role of academia is also visioning what is possible and seeing what is possible for the future. So what are the transformational changes that we could create that maybe farmers don't necessarily envision right now. So I think there's a fine line there between listening to farmers and producing what they need, but also seeing beyond that possibility to what we believe is feasible. I think a really important aspect of getting the products to farmers is using the right technologies for the right trait. Obviously, certain technologies are much easier to get into the field and easier to have impact. So if it's possible to bring a trait into the field using plant breeding, then absolutely we have to do that, because much easier to get into the field if we can use the existing genetic diversity that's already in the crop plants. But I don't think we should be scared away to use things like genetic modification if it brings the transformational changes and brings in traits such as replacing inorganic fertilizers. That is a true transformation, and there it's worth the investment and the effort to get that working through alternative technologies. But I think the most important part of getting products to farmers, particularly smallholder farmers, is working in partnership. Crop Science Centre is a really important part of this puzzle, but we alone cannot deliver seed to farmers. We have to be working in partnership with other organizations, and that means working with partners on the ground, so local researchers, local industry, as well as some of the international companies, to take some of the discoveries that we make and get them into the into the crops and fields of farmers that need them most. So I think it's a combination of choosing the right traits, working on the right crops, using the right technologies, and building the partnerships, the whole, to make sure you've got the entire stream from the initial discovery through to getting the products into the farmers' fields.
Can I, Giles, thank you for that. Can I just, there's a couple of sort of follow-up questions on that question of the local knowledge of farmers in different contexts around the world. So, and relating to sort of working in interdisciplinary ways with the social sciences. So Peter Emmerich, I see notes, asks about plans for involving social science. Colleague at Cambridge, Sila Jarfanel, asks a similar question. What's your vision for the sort of the scope of interdisciplinarity of the centre?
Yeah, so that's a really important point, and it's certainly a strength that we have here in Cambridge, that we have the excellence across the board across the different fields. So I think, you know, we can bring engineering in, we can bring robotics, artificial intelligence, mathematics, social scientists. I think all of that needs to be part of they all play an important role in solving that problem of food security. I was in Washington just before the lockdown, looking between the Royal Society and the National Academy of Sciences, looking at food production. And the thing that I took home most of all was that over the period where we've been working so hard to increase food production, we've also seen a massive expansion in food waste. And that's the last thing I want to do, right? To make all of this effort to bring down the cost of food production and increase the potential for food production, only to get greater waste. And so I think that that's key. The key to really having the sort of impact that we want is recognizing that right from the start and working in partnerships, both within the university across the disciplines, but of course also working with the partnerships outside of the university, such that the impact that we have is the impact that we want.
Thank you. There's so many great questions that I do also invite the panel to sort of look and pick out questions that you'd particularly like to answer. But there's one that's sort of struck me from Alexandra Antonelli at Kew, who writes, the State of the World's Plants and Fungi 2020 report released yesterday shows that 90% of energy intake for people comes from just 15 crop species. However, we've found over 7,000 edible species could become new crops, but have been largely neglected. How do you think the centre, and how should plant sciences more broadly think about selecting species to work on? And perhaps David, I wonder if you'd like a response to that question.
Thank you, Rob. That's precisely the point that I was alluding to when I mentioned the potential for diversification in agriculture. I mean, a little story that has got some publicity recently is about how gene editing has been used to take ground cherry physalis from being a crop that is difficult to cultivate into one that is relatively easy to cultivate. So not changing a whole lot about the plant, just its habit. So a relatively easy step that can be used then to convert this nutritious plant that could be one of our 5 a day if it were easier to grow into something that can be cultivated more readily. And I can just see opportunities for that type of innovation across the board so that we can get away from this hegemony of this few major crops that we have at the moment. And the benefits of this will be nutritional. We've got Tim Spector telling us that we should be eating 30 species a week of plants, so we can diversify the plants in our diet, but also there'll be ecological benefits as well if agricultural systems could be more diverse than they are at present.
David, in a way, it's a sort of follow-up question, or could be, from Stephen Hill at UKRI, because some of the techniques that would make what you're talking about possible, you know, have the potential, I mean, certainly they interest, let's say, the wider public, and to some extent can cause concern. So how do you think the centre should be engaging the public in the research of the centre and thinking about how public views can be brought into the research?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is to inform the public and persuade the public that what we're trying to do is a good thing. So what we're trying to do in the Crop Science Centre is to facilitate developing an agriculture that is more sustainable than we have at present, that contributes to healthy diets, that is productive without degrading ecosystem services. And if we can get across that message, that this is the mission of the Crop Science Centre, not only for British agriculture, but agriculture in international regions as well, then the other discussion about the technologies that we use sort of follows on from that. But I think that we have to talk about the aspirations, first of all. Why are we doing what we're doing? And what do we hope to achieve? And I think that's it in a nutshell, is sustainable, sufficient, and nutritious food production.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure it will. The work will generate lots of interest. So how the centre can harness that and contribute to those public debates and understandings, I'm sure will be very important. We've also had a lot of questions that sort of exploring the model for translation and partnerships. What is the business model? How are the different partnerships going to work to take the science from the lab and from the test site to the world? Tina, I wondered if you wanted to pick up on that. What's your vision, first of all, about how the business model is going to work? And does that need to vary between first world and developing world contexts? And what's the sort of vision for partnership working?
Well, it's interesting. I was looking, when you said, see if there are any questions you want to answer. One of the questions from Chris Tapsell at KWS, but is also reflected in some of the other questions, is about how will industry be able to support the Crop Science Centre and help to deliver impact. And he makes the point that it shouldn't simply be by providing funding. And of course, it is not our model, that we should just, well, you know, I've often said that an exciting research project can be just an exciting research project. And at the end of it, you stop the research, you toss the results over the wall, and you hope that someone catches it and creates value out of it. We really don't want to do that. We do want to use the resources and capabilities in industry and with colleagues in other institutions, so that we can, as rapidly as possible, get these research products into the ground. We don't want to stop at the end of a 3 to 5 year research programme. The business model is quite complicated. Niab already has quite a complicated business model, And of course, there are various elements to how the Crop Science Centre will work and how the funding for it will work. As we've seen from Giles's presentation, philanthropy has been incredibly important in getting it off the ground. But we also have some very good, strong connections already with delivery partners. So both through the connections with the Gates Foundation and the UK Aid, but also through industry. So we just want to maintain those relationships at a level where they can really help us to have that impact.
Great, thank you. And building on that, Giles, perhaps one for you. So this one is from Joanna Walsenhomer from University of Cambridge, who asks, so, thinking about the impact that the centre hopes to have on the developing world agriculture, will this be reflected in the staffing of the centre, and how will you make sure that innovations you come up with are practical and really relevant for conditions in different parts of the world?
So almost certain, I mean, I already have an extremely diverse research group, and I really value diversity among the researchers. And we are really trying to pioneer on ensuring diversity and equality in the agricultural sciences of the Crop Science Centre. It's something that I feel very passionately about. And so almost certainly I would like to see as much diversity among the research community as we can possibly achieve. I think one really important aspect of recognizing impact for smallholders is that we have to be working on the crops that they are actually growing. And that means developing, where we can work on them locally, we need to be doing so. And if we can't work on those crops locally, then we need to be working in partnerships with researchers around the world, but particularly local researchers in, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa, who are working with those crops. And that's something that we're working on right now, developing the partnerships that are necessary to have the impact that we want to achieve.
Thank you. With an eye on the clock, I want to now ask David or Tina if you want to make a sort of final comment, and then I'll hand over to Giles. So perhaps David, I'll ask you first, and then Tina. David, any closing words of wisdom to mark this important day?
Well, just to say how excited I am about this. I'm very happy that we've got Giles as our director of the crop science, and I think that we should just reiterate again our thanks to Rob Cawthorne, who really as a benefactor got the ball rolling to get this initiative, to give it some momentum. So Rob, thank you very much for that. And I'm confident that we will be able to repay your generosity, and that good stuff will come out of the centre.
Thank you, David. And Tina?
So I'd like to thank David for his vision and his persistence in getting us to this point, and also the other colleagues in the university. When Giles was appointed Professor of Crop Science, I was really excited because I knew we'd found the person who could take that vision forward. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how that develops.
So Giles, a lot on your shoulders.
Well, yes, thank you to Tina and to David, and also to Rob for those very generous words. And I want to just say thank you to all of you for joining us today. I'm just going to share my screen one more time, just to say that, you know, this is just the start of the journey. And please keep in touch with us. You can get access, you can sign up to our newsletter from our website, cropsciencecentre.org. You can follow us on Twitter at CropSciCentre, and please do tweet about the launch, #CSC Launch 2020. I really want to end the launch with that point about partnerships, because we do have significant challenges, but we also have some pretty fantastic opportunities. And I'm excited about what we can achieve in transforming the way we grow our food around the planet. But we cannot do that alone. We can only do it in partnerships with different disciplines, partnerships with different organizations. And I really welcome you to join us on this journey to recognize that fundamental agricultural transformation that I think we so desperately need for 2050 and ensuring a secure, sustainable and equitable global food production. So thank you everybody for joining us, and I hope you to continue to this discussion, and I hope to work with you all in the future. Thank you.